Look what they sent us, boys. A kindergarten teacher with a BB gun. Staff Sergeant Decker Raines's voice boomed across the Coronado precision range like a foghorn, his massive frame casting a shadow over the equipment tables. The morning sun glinted off his polished combat boots as he gestured mockingly toward the petite woman methodically unpacking a rifle case at Station 7. I bet she's here to teach us how to shoot paper targets at the county fair. 30 elite SEAL operators erupted in cruel laughter, their voices echoing off the concrete barriers. The sound was predatory, wolves circling fresh prey. Ember Thorne didn't flinch. Her blonde hair, tied in that messy high bun with loose curls catching the breeze, stayed perfectly positioned as she continued her setup ritual. Gray civilian contractor shirt, dark military pants, brown combat boots. She looked exactly like what Raines claimed. Someone playing soldier. "Ma'am, you sure you're in the right place?" Lieutenant Tommy Brooks shouted from the observation deck, pointing dramatically toward the base exit with theatrical flair. "The Girl Scout cookie booth is about 10 miles that way." More laughter. Someone whistled. A paper airplane sailed past her head. But as Ember reached for her scope case, her gray shirt pulled tight across her chest for just a moment, revealing the hint of something dark beneath the fabric. 8 thin lines radiating from a central point, barely visible through the cotton. No one noticed. They were too busy laughing. She straightened slowly, turned to face the crowd, and spoke for the first time. Her voice carried clearly across the range, calm as still water. "Before we begin, I have one question." The laughter died. "How many of you have actually killed someone at 1,000 yards? Silence. Complete, sudden, suffocating silence. "That's what I thought." She smiled. Not friendly, not warm. Predatory. "Now, let me teach you to shoot." The morning heat was already building at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, that dry California sun that turned concrete into griddles and made steel too hot to touch with bare skin. The precision marksmanship range stretched out like a runway, with target stations dotting the landscape at measured intervals. 100 yards, 300, 500, 800, and the infamous 1,000-yard line, where only the most elite shooters dared attempt their craft. Ember Thorne had arrived at 0600 hours, 2 hours before the mandatory, advanced civilian contractor training session was scheduled to begin. She'd driven through the base gates in a dusty Honda Civic, passing the monument to fallen SEALs with its bronze figures frozen in eternal vigilance. The guard at the gate had barely glanced at her civilian contractor badge, just another Pentagon-mandated training requirement for some pencil pusher who'd never held a real weapon. By the time the first SEAL operators began filtering onto the range at 0730, Ember had already completed her equipment inspection. Her rifle case lay open like a surgeon's kit, each component nestled in custom-cut foam. The weapon itself was civilian legal, but clearly high-end. A precision bolt-action rifle with modifications that spoke of serious intent, rather than weekend hobby shooting. Staff Sergeant Decker Raines had spotted her immediately. At 6 feet 4 inches and 240 pounds of muscle, Raines dominated any space he entered. His combat uniform was pressed to razor sharpness, his boots mirror bright, his bearing that of a man who'd earned his position through blood and sweat, in places that didn't officially exist. When he saw the petite blonde woman setting up at the instructor's station, his reaction was immediate and visceral. "What fresh nonsense is this?" he'd muttered to Master Chief Rick Stone, a grizzled veteran whose scarred hands told stories of 23 years in special operations. Stone just shrugged, checking his watch. Orders came down from the Pentagon. Some new initiative about civilian contractor integration. We sit through 2 hours of whatever this lady has to say, then we get back to real training. Raines's expression had darkened. "Real training? Chief, I've got operators who can put 3 rounds through a quarter at 500 yards in crosswinds. What's this civilian going to teach us? How to shoot squirrels in her backyard?" The conversation had carried, as Raines intended it to. Soon, the assembled SEALs were sizing up their supposed instructor with undisguised skepticism. Lieutenant Brooks, a lean Texan with a perpetual smirk, started the commentary. "Think she's ever even seen a real rifle? That little pop gun she's got there looks like something my daughter would use at summer camp. Petty Officer Miguel Santos, usually the quiet observer of the group, found himself drawn into the mockery. Maybe she's here to teach us about gun safety. You know, always point the barrel in a safe direction and all that basic stuff we learned in boot camp. The laughter built gradually, feeding on itself. Casey Walsh, one of only 3 women in the SEAL community, watched from the back with growing discomfort. She recognized the dynamic all too well, the immediate dismissal based on appearance, the assumption that competence correlated with size and aggression. But even Casey found herself questioning what this civilian instructor could possibly offer to operators who trained at levels most people couldn't comprehend. Ember continued her setup, seemingly oblivious to the growing commentary. Her movements were methodical, precise, almost ritualistic. She checked her scope mounts 3 times, running her fingers along the rail system with the kind of attention most people reserved for defusing bombs. When she attached the bipod, each click of the mechanism was audible in the morning air, sharp and final like a closing vault. "Look at her taking her sweet time," Rains called out, his voice carrying the authority of command. "We've got a full training schedule today, lady. Some of us have real missions to prepare for." Ember glanced up briefly, her blue eyes meeting his for just a moment. "Precision takes time, Sergeant. Rushing gets people killed." The response drew more laughter, but it was different now, edged with genuine contempt. "Killed?" Rains stepped closer, his bulk casting her in shadow. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you look like you'd faint at the sound of a firecracker. When exactly did you serve in combat?" "I didn't say I served in combat," Ember replied calmly, returning her attention to her rifle. "I said rushing gets people killed. That's true whether you're crossing a street or crossing a kill zone." Lieutenant Brooks jumped in from the observation deck. "Kill zone? Holy cow, she's using operator terminology now. Did you learn that from watching movies, sweetie?" The sweetie hung in the air like a challenge. Even the enlisted men shifted uncomfortably. There were lines you didn't cross, even in the military's rough-and-tumble culture. But Ember didn't react. She simply continued her preparation, checking her ammunition with the same methodical care she'd shown everything else. "You know what I think?" Rains announced to the crowd, playing to his audience now. "I think someone in Washington decided we needed sensitivity training disguised as marksmanship instruction. Pretty soon they'll be sending us flower arrangers to teach us about battlefield aesthetics." The laughter was ugly now, meant to wound. But as the sound washed over her, something shifted in Ember's posture. It was subtle, a straightening of the shoulders, a settling of weight into a more balanced stance. Her breathing changed too, becoming deeper, more controlled. The transformation was so slight that only someone with extensive combat training might notice it. Casey Walsh noticed. She'd spent enough time around truly dangerous people to recognize the signs. The nervous energy that had surrounded Ember like a cloud was dissipating, replaced by something much more focused. It reminded Casey of the stillness that came over snipers just before they engaged targets at extreme range. That moment when the human body became a precision instrument calibrated for a single purpose. "Sergeant Rains," Ember said, her voice carrying clearly across the range despite its quiet tone. "Since you seem to have opinions about my qualifications, why don't you demonstrate yours? Standard qualification course, 300 yards, 5 rounds, rapid fire." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Rains looked around at his men, seeing the expectation in their faces. He couldn't back down now, not in front of 30 elite operators who looked to him for leadership. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think you understand what you're asking. This isn't a competition. This is supposed to be your instruction period." "Then instruct me," Ember replied. "Show me how it's done." Rains grabbed his rifle from the equipment rack, a military-issue M4 carbine configured for precision work. He'd qualified expert with it for 8 straight years, could hit man-sized targets at 400 yards consistently. The 300-yard shot she'd suggested was well within his capabilities, almost insultingly easy. He dropped into a prone position with practiced efficiency, adjusting his scope and checking wind conditions out of habit more than necessity. The morning air was still, the California sun providing perfect visibility. The target at 300 yards looked massive through his optic. 5 rounds rapid fire, he announced, chambering the first round. Watch and learn, ma'am. The shots came in quick succession. Bang, 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 with barely a pause between them. Rains was a good shooter, one of the best in his unit. All 5 rounds found the target, clustering in an area about the size of a dinner plate. Not perfect, but solid performance that would earn him expert qualification on any military range. He stood up, ejecting the empty magazine with a flourish. That's how it's done. Consistent, reliable, combat-effective shooting. Now, what exactly are you planning to teach us that we don't already know? Ember walked over to the spotting scope, studying his target through the high-powered optic. The silence stretched out as she examined his work, her expression unreadable. Finally, she straightened up. "Not bad," she said. "Your breathing was consistent, your trigger control was smooth, and your sight picture was properly aligned. You're clearly well-trained." Rains smiled, thinking he'd made his point. But Ember wasn't finished. "However, your shots are pulling slightly left, suggesting either a trigger finger placement issue or a scope that's not perfectly zeroed. Your rapid-fire tempo was actually too fast for maximum accuracy. You weren't allowing time for proper follow-through on each shot. And most importantly, you were shooting at a stationary target in perfect conditions, with unlimited time to prepare." She paused, letting that sink in. In real combat, how often do you get perfect conditions? "Look, lady," Rains began, but Ember held up a hand. "My turn?" If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, hit that like button right now. This story will prove that silence is sometimes more powerful than shouting. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the thanks button to support the channel, because there are even more surprises ahead. By the way, what country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Before anyone could object, Ember moved to the firing line. But instead of the 300-yard target Rains had used, she pointed toward the 500-yard line. "Let's make it interesting." She dropped into position with fluid grace, her body settling into the prone stance like water finding its level. But her positioning was different from anything the SEALs had seen in their standard training. Her support hand was placed differently. Her trigger finger made contact at an unusual angle, and her breathing pattern seemed almost meditative. "What kind of shooting position is that?" Lieutenant Brooks called out. "That's not in any manual I've ever seen." Ember didn't answer. She was checking wind conditions, not with instruments, but with observation, watching how the heat shimmer affected her view through the scope, noting how the grass moved at different distances, feeling the air pressure against her exposed skin. It was the kind of environmental reading that came from thousands of hours in field conditions, where meteorological data wasn't available. She chambered around and settled behind the rifle. The silence that followed was different from the mocking quiet of minutes before. This was expectant, focused. Even the skeptics found themselves holding their breath. The shot broke like thunder, the sound echoing off the concrete barriers and rolling across the range. Through the spotting scope, Casey Walsh watched the 500-yard target dead center, exactly in the middle of the X-ring. "Not bad," Rains admitted grudgingly, "but one shot doesn't." 4 more shots followed in rapid succession, each one precisely timed, each one delivered with mechanical consistency. When the echoes faded, Ember stood up and stepped back from the rifle. "Check the target," she said simply. Casey adjusted the spotting scope, bringing the distant target into sharp focus. What she saw made her gasp audibly. All 5 shots had passed through the same hole, not just in the X-ring, but overlapping so precisely that the damage looked like it had been made by a single, perfectly placed round. "That's impossible," Rains whispered, moving to the spotting scope himself. "At 500 yards, with rapid fire, environmental factors alone should spread those shots by at least..." He stopped talking when he saw the target for himself. The other SEALs crowded around, each taking their turn at the optic. The impossible had just happened in front of 30 witnesses. "Lucky shot," Lieutenant Brooks announced, but his voice lacked conviction. "Wind conditions must have been perfect." "5 lucky shots?" Casey asked quietly. "All in the exact same place?" Master Chief Stone had been in special operations long enough to recognize something extraordinary when he saw it. He studied Ember with new eyes, taking in details he'd missed before. The way she moved with unconscious efficiency. The complete absence of wasted motion in her actions. The fact that she'd just accomplished something that shouldn't have been possible with a civilian rifle under field conditions. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" "Here and there," Ember replied, beginning to clean her rifle with the same methodical precision she'd shown in everything else. "You pick things up," but Rains wasn't ready to concede. His authority had been challenged in front of his men, and the 5 impossible shots had shaken something fundamental in his worldview. "One target, perfect conditions. Let's see how you do when things get complicated." He gestured toward the 1,000-yard line, where targets waited at the absolute limit of the range's capability. At that distance, shots required mathematical precision, accounting for bullet drop, wind drift, air density, and a dozen other factors. It was the kind of shooting that separated the elite from the merely good. 1,000 yards, Rains announced. Moving target simulation, crosswind conditions, timed fire. 2 minutes to engage 5 targets in sequence. It was an impossible challenge. Even with military-grade equipment and unlimited preparation time, the shot difficulty bordered on supernatural. With civilian gear and a 2-minute time limit, it was simply undoable. "Sergeant," Commander Jackson Vale's voice cut across the range like a blade. The assembled SEALs snapped to attention as the base's senior officer approached. Vale was old-school military, a career officer who'd earned his rank through competence rather than politics. His weathered face showed the accumulated stress of 2 decades in command positions. "Sir," Rains responded, coming to attention, "we're conducting the mandatory civilian contractor training as ordered." Vale studied the situation with calculating eyes. He'd heard the shooting from his office, the distinctive crack of precision rifles being fired in rapid succession. When he'd looked out his window and seen the entire training class gathered around the spotting scopes, he'd decided to investigate personally. "And how is that training progressing, Sergeant?" "Well, sir, the contractor has demonstrated some shooting ability, but we were just about to test her capabilities under more challenging conditions." Vale walked over to the spotting scope, adjusting it to examine the 500-yard target. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He spent long minutes studying the target, occasionally adjusting the scope's focus as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Contractor," he said finally, turning to face Ember. "What's your name?" "Ember Thorne, sir. Civilian marksmanship instructor, contracted through the Pentagon's Skills Integration Program." Vale nodded slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. Something was bothering him. Some nagging sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. Thorne. That name doesn't sound familiar. "How long have you been doing this kind of instruction?" "About 6 months, sir, since I transitioned out of previous employment." "Previous employment?" Ember's fingers moved unconsciously to her collar, adjusting the gray fabric slightly. The motion was subtle, but Vale caught it. The kind of nervous gesture that suggested hidden information. "Various consulting work, sir. Risk assessment, security evaluation, that sort of thing." It was a non-answer, the kind of vague response that people gave when they had something to hide. Vale had heard enough of them over the years to recognize evasion when he heard it. "Sergeant Rains," he said, never taking his eyes off Ember. "I think your 1,000-yard challenge is an excellent idea. But let's make it interesting. Full combat simulation, unknown distance targets, wind conditions, limited ammunition, and a real-time pressure scenario." He gestured toward the advanced training area, where computer-controlled targets could simulate actual battlefield conditions. "If Miss Thorne is going to be instructing our operators, she should demonstrate her capabilities under realistic conditions." Ember's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Sir, That level of simulation isn't usually part of civilian contractor demonstrations. No, Vale agreed. It isn't. But then, most civilian contractors don't put 5 rounds through the same hole at 500 yards either. The challenge was issued, and there was no backing down. As they moved toward the advanced training area, Ember's fingers found the scope adjustments on her rifle, making micro-corrections with the kind of muscle memory that spoke of thousands of hours behind the trigger. The advanced range was a different animal entirely. Computer-controlled targets could appear and disappear at random intervals, simulating the unpredictable nature of combat engagements. Environmental controls could introduce crosswinds, temperature variations, even simulated weather conditions. It was as close to real combat as training could get without actual bullets flying back at the shooter. Standard rules, Vale announced as they reached the firing line. Unknown distance targets at ranges from 300 to 1,000 yards. Targets will appear for random intervals between 5 and 30 seconds. 5 targets total, 5 rounds of ammunition. Miss any target, and the exercise is considered failed. The SEALs gathered around the observation area, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. This was the kind of shooting challenge that would test even their most skilled marksmen. For a civilian contractor to attempt it bordered on either supreme confidence or complete delusion. Ember settled into position behind her rifle, but her setup process was different now. Gone was the methodical, almost leisurely pace she'd shown earlier. Now her movements were sharp, efficient, and practiced. She adjusted her scope with rapid precision, checked her ammunition with barely a glance, and settled into a shooting position that spoke of countless hours under pressure. Targets will begin appearing in 30 seconds, Vale announced. Time starts. Now. The first target appeared at approximately 600 yards, a man-sized silhouette that would be visible for exactly 20 seconds. Through her scope, Ember calculated distance, wind drift, and bullet drop in seconds that would have taken most shooters minutes to work through. Her finger found the trigger with gentle pressure, and the rifle cracked once. The target dropped immediately, hit center mass. Target number 2 appeared at 800 yards, visible for only 10 seconds. Ember's rifle tracked smoothly to the new position, her breathing controlled, her trigger press perfect. Another hit, another dropped target. By the 4th target, the assembled SEALs had stopped talking entirely. They were watching something that transcended normal shooting skill and moved into the realm of the extraordinary. Ember's movements were smooth as flowing water, each shot delivered with mechanical precision, despite the enormous time pressure. The 5th and final target appeared at the maximum range, 1,000 yards exactly, and would be visible for only 8 seconds. At that distance, with that time constraint, the shot was mathematically at the edge of possibility. The bullet would take over a second to reach the target, meaning Ember had to predict exactly where it would be when the round arrived. She settled behind the rifle one final time, her breathing slowing to an almost supernatural calm. The world around her seemed to fade away. The watching SEALs, the pressure of the challenge, everything except the target and the precise calculations needed to reach it. The rifle spoke, and 1 second later, the distant target fell. Silence followed, absolute and complete. 30 elite special operations personnel stood in stunned quiet, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. 5 targets, 5 shots, 5 hits, under conditions that would challenge the world's best military snipers. Commander Vale was the first to speak. Miss Thorne, that was extraordinary shooting. Where exactly did you learn those skills? But before Ember could answer, her shirt had shifted during the final shooting position, and Lieutenant Brooks caught sight of something that made him freeze. Just visible above the neckline of her gray contractor shirt was the edge of what looked like a tattoo. Not decorative artwork, but something black and geometric, like part of a symbol or insignia. "Ma'am," Brooks said carefully, "is that a unit tattoo?" Ember's hand moved quickly to adjust her collar, but not before several other SEALs had noticed. In military culture, tattoos often told stories: unit insignia, deployment markers, memorials to fallen comrades. But the glimpse they'd caught looked different. more complex and somehow darker than typical military ink. "Just personal artwork," Ember replied, but her voice had changed slightly. The casual confidence was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more guarded. Vale studied her face with growing intensity. Something about her shooting style, combined with the hint of military tattoo, was triggering memories he couldn't quite grasp. The way she moved, the precision of her shooting, the complete comfort under pressure. It all suggested training far beyond civilian contractor level. Ember's fingers moved across the precision optic with practiced ease, the kind of military-grade scope system that special operations units depend on for impossible shots. The variable magnification display showed crystal-clear target detail at distances where normal equipment would fail completely. Temperature compensation, wind drift calculation, bullet drop prediction, all integrated into a single targeting solution. These advanced optics weren't just tools. They were the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In environments where a single shot could save or cost dozens of lives, precision wasn't luxury. It was survival. The scope she adjusted had seen action in 3 different theaters, its durability tested under conditions that would destroy civilian equipment instantly. As Ember made final adjustments to her equipment, Master Chief Stone approached Commander Vale with obvious concern. "Sir, I've been thinking about that shooting exhibition. Those weren't lucky shots or civilian-level skills. That woman has training that goes way beyond anything available in the private sector." Vale nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing, Chief. Her shooting style reminded me of something, but I can't quite place it. Run a background check on Ember Thorne through military channels. Something about this whole situation doesn't add up." While Stone headed to the communications center, the training exercise continued. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Where before there had been mockery and dismissal, now there was genuine respect mixed with growing suspicion. The SEALs found themselves studying Ember with new eyes, looking for clues about who she really was. Casey Walsh was the first to notice additional details. As Ember bent to examine her rifle case, her shirt pulled tight across her back, revealing what looked like significant scarring along her shoulder blade. Not the kind of surgical scars from medical procedures, but the irregular, jagged marks that came from shrapnel or explosive damage. "Sarge," Casey whispered to Rains, "look at her shoulder when she bends over. Those are combat wounds." Rains studied Ember more carefully, his earlier hostility replaced by professional curiosity. Now that he was looking for them, the signs were obvious. The way she unconsciously scanned the horizon while shooting, checking for threats that weren't there. The manner in which she positioned herself with clear lines of sight to all potential approaches. The fact that she kept her back to solid cover whenever possible. "Ma'am," Rains said, his tone much more respectful than before, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on appearances that were clearly wrong. Would you mind if I asked about your background?" Ember looked up from her equipment, her blue eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "What would you like to know, Sergeant?" "Well, for starters, where did you serve? Because that shooting ability doesn't come from civilian training." "I never said I didn't serve," Ember replied carefully. "I said I was currently working as a civilian contractor." People transition out of military service for various reasons. "What unit?" Lieutenant Brooks pressed. "Rangers? Special Forces? Because what you just did requires training at the highest levels." Ember's fingers found her collar again, the nervous gesture that Commander Vale had noticed earlier. "I'd rather not get into specifics. Some experiences are better left in the past." But the questions were building momentum now. Petty Officer Santos, who had initially joined in the mockery, found himself genuinely curious about the woman who had just redefined his understanding of marksmanship capability. "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but that tattoo, is it unit-related?" "In special operations, ink often tells stories. It's personal," Ember said firmly, but her hand instinctively moved to cover the area where the black lines had been visible. "Can you guess what number is really hidden behind that tattoo? If you're feeling curious and want to know the truth, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the most shocking revelation. The skills she just demonstrated are only the tip of the iceberg. Master Chief Stone returned from the communications center with a troubled expression. He gestured for Commander Vale to join him away from the group, and their whispered conversation grew increasingly intense. After several minutes, Vale's face had gone completely pale. "Miss Thorne," Vale called out, his voice carrying new authority, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" As they walked away from the gathered SEALs, Vale's mind was racing. Stone's background check had turned up disturbing inconsistencies. Ember Thorne existed as a person. Social security number, civilian contractor credentials, even a clean driving record. But there were gaps in her history, periods where she seemed to disappear from any official records. "Miss Thorne," Vale began carefully, "Chief Stone ran a routine background verification, and we're finding some anomalies. Could you clarify your military service record?" Ember stopped walking and turned to face him directly. For a moment, her carefully maintained civilian demeanor slipped, and Vale caught a glimpse of something much harder underneath. "Commander, my contractor credentials are legitimate. I'm qualified to provide the training specified in my Pentagon authorization. Is there a specific problem with my performance today?" "No," Vale admitted. "Your performance has been extraordinary. That's actually what's concerning me. The level of skill you've demonstrated suggests training that goes far beyond standard military instruction. People can exceed expectations, sir." "Not like this," Vale said firmly. "What you did today, 5 shots through the same hole at 500 yards, then perfect performance under full combat simulation. That's not exceptional military training. That's elite special operations level skill." Ember said nothing, but something in her posture shifted. The casual contractor facade was melting away, replaced by the bearing of someone accustomed to handling classified information under pressure. "Miss Thorne, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Have you ever been assigned to any special operations unit, particularly one involved in classified activities?" The silence stretched between them for long seconds. In the distance, the SEALs were engaged in animated discussion about the shooting demonstration they'd witnessed. But here, in this bubble of growing tension, 2 people were circling around truths that could reshape everything. "Commander," Ember said finally, "there are some questions that I'm not authorized to answer. My current assignment is to provide marksmanship instruction to your personnel. I believe I've demonstrated my qualifications for that role." It was confirmation without admission, the kind of careful response that intelligence professionals used when discussing matters that officially didn't exist. Vale felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was deeply troubling. On the desk lay the standard deployment paperwork, the financial protection documents every operator completed before heading into hostile territory. Life insurance policies specifically designed for high-risk military operations, with coverage calculations that factored in the realities of special operations. The premiums were higher, but so were the stakes. Families needed guarantees that went beyond standard civilian policies. Investment programs tailored for military careers, accounting for irregular income, deployment cycles, and the unique challenges of transitioning from active duty to civilian life. It wasn't just about the money. It was about ensuring that service members could focus on their missions without worrying about their family's security. The statistics were clear. Properly structured military financial planning reduced stress-related performance issues by 40%. While Vale and Ember continued their tense conversation, Master Chief Stone was conducting his own investigation. He'd returned to the communications center and was digging deeper into military databases, using access codes that reached into the classified realm of special operations records. What he found made his blood run cold. There was an Ember Thorne in the civilian contractor database, but there was also a classified file for someone named Scarlett Morrison, call sign Spider, who had served with a special operations unit that had been involved in some of the military's most sensitive missions. According to the classified records, Morrison had been declared killed in action during an operation designated Phantom Ridge, approximately 5 years earlier. But looking at the file photograph of Scarlett Spider Morrison, Stone found himself staring at a face he recognized. Younger, harder, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much combat, but unmistakably the same woman who was currently demonstrating impossible marksmanship skills to a group of Navy SEALs. Stone's hands shook as he printed the classified file. If he was right, if Ember Thorne was actually Scarlett Morrison, then they were dealing with someone who had been officially declared dead for 5 years. Someone whose kill count, according to the classified records, stood at 512 confirmed enemy eliminations. The implications were staggering. People didn't just fake their own deaths and resurface as civilian contractors without powerful reasons. And if Morrison had indeed survived Phantom Ridge when all other unit members had been declared KIA, then there were questions about what had really happened during that classified operation. Back on the range, the SEALs were becoming increasingly restless. The extraordinary shooting demonstration had shattered their preconceptions, but the growing secrecy around Ember's background was raising new concerns. These were men accustomed to knowing exactly who they were working with, and the mystery surrounding their supposed instructor was triggering professional paranoia. Lieutenant Brooks had been studying Ember from a distance, trying to reconcile her appearance with her demonstrated capabilities. "Something about this whole situation is wrong," he muttered to Petty Officer Santos. "Civilian contractors don't shoot like that. Holy cow, most of our own snipers don't shoot like that." "Maybe she's former military," Santos suggested. "Plenty of special operations personnel transitioned to civilian work. Then why the secrecy? Why not just say she's former Special Forces or Rangers? People are proud of that service." Casey Walsh overheard the conversation and found herself drawn into the speculation. What if she's not supposed to be here? What if this whole civilian contractor thing is a cover for something else? The questions were multiplying faster than answers, and the atmosphere on the range was becoming increasingly tense. When Commander Vale and Ember returned from their private conversation, both looked like they were carrying the weight of significant secrets. "Attention!" Vale called out, bringing the assembled SEALs to formation. "I want everyone to understand that today's training exercise involved demonstration of advanced marksmanship techniques. Miss Thorne's background and qualifications are verified through appropriate channels. Any questions about classified matters should be directed through proper command structure." It was military speak for "stop asking questions," but it only increased the speculation. When officers started talking about classified matters and proper channels, it usually meant that significant secrets were involved. Ember stepped forward to address the group directly. "Gentlemen and lady," she nodded toward Casey. "Today's demonstration was intended to show you possibilities beyond your current training. The techniques I've shown can be learned, but they require dedication and practice that goes beyond normal military instruction." "Ma'am," Master Chief Stone said carefully, "speaking hypothetically, what kind of operational experience would be necessary to develop those skills?" Ember met his gaze directly. "Hypothetically, Chief, the kind of experience that people don't talk about in polite company. The kind that happens in places that don't appear on maps, against enemies who don't wear uniforms." The answer hung in the air like a confession. Everyone present understood the euphemisms. She was talking about classified special operations, the kind of missions that officially never happened. "And hypothetically," Stone continued, "what would motivate someone with that level of experience to work as a civilian contractor, teaching basic marksmanship to people who already have extensive training?" For the first time since arriving at the range, Ember's composure cracked slightly. Her fingers moved unconsciously to her collar, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained facade slipped. "Sometimes, Chief, people need to find new ways to serve. Sometimes the old ways become unavailable." It was then that Master Chief Stone decided to take a calculated risk. He'd been in special operations long enough to recognize the signs of someone carrying significant psychological weight. Ember's demeanor, her evasive answers, her extraordinary skills, everything pointed to someone with a classified past that had ended badly. "Miss Thorne," he said formally. "Or should I say, Miss Morrison." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Ember went completely still, her body language shifting from cautious civilian to full combat readiness in the space of a heartbeat. Her hand moved instinctively toward where a sidearm would normally be holstered, and her eyes scanned the assembled group with the calculating gaze of someone assessing threats. "I think you have me confused with someone else, Chief," she said, but her voice had changed completely. Gone was the careful civilian tone, replaced by the clipped precision of someone accustomed to operating under extreme pressure. Stone pulled out the printed classified file, holding it so that only Ember could see the contents. The photograph of Scarlet Spider Morrison stared back at her like a ghost from a past she'd tried to bury. Phantom Ridge, October 23rd, 5 years ago. 12 operators went in. According to official records, 0 came out. All personnel listed as killed in action. Ember's face had gone completely pale, but her voice remained steady. Chief, I don't know what you think you found, but 512 confirmed kills, Stone continued relentlessly. Longest recorded elimination at 1,800 yards. Unit designation classified. Real name, Scarlet Morrison. Call sign, Spider. The word spider hit the assembled SEALs like a physical blow. Even in the highly classified world of special operations, certain names became legend. Spider was one of them. A mythical figure who had supposedly operated in the deepest black operations, achieving kill counts that bordered on the supernatural. But Spider was supposed to be dead. Holy cow, Lieutenant Brooks whispered. Spider's real? Unbelievable. 512 confirmed kills? If you're as shocked as I am, like this video right now and share it. The truth about Phantom Ridge is about to be revealed, and you'll understand why she had to die in the records. Subscribe if you want to know who was really behind this cover-up. Ember looked around at the circle of faces staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. The carefully constructed cover identity she'd maintained for 5 years was crumbling in real time, and there was no way to stop the collapse. My name is Ember Thorne, she said firmly. I'm a civilian contractor authorized to provide marksmanship instruction. Anything else is speculation. But Master Chief Stone wasn't finished. According to this file, Scarlet Morrison was the primary sniper for a unit that operated in 7 different theaters over 4 years. The elimination count verified through multiple sources, specialized in impossible shots under extreme conditions. He gestured toward the targets she'd just destroyed with casual precision, kind of like what we just witnessed. Commander Vale had been listening to the exchange with growing alarm. If Stone was right, if Ember was actually Scarlet Morrison, then they were dealing with someone whose very existence raised enormous questions about military operations, classified missions, and cover-ups that reached to the highest levels of command. Miss Thorne, Vale said carefully, I'm going to ask you one more time. Is there anything about your background that I need to know from an operational security standpoint? Ember stood silently for long moments, weighing her options. She could continue the denial, maintain the cover identity, and hope that the classified nature of the records would prevent further investigation. Or she could acknowledge the truth and deal with the consequences. The choice was made for her when her gray contractor shirt shifted slightly in the California breeze, revealing more of the black tattoo that had caught Lieutenant Brooks's attention earlier. But now, with multiple people looking for it, the true nature of the artwork became visible. It wasn't a unit insignia or patriotic symbol. It was a spider, a black widow spider positioned precisely at the center of her chest, with 8 legs radiating outward like spokes of a wheel. But these weren't decorative legs. Each one was marked with small hash marks, like tally marks on a prison wall. Petty Officer Santos, who had the sharpest eyes in the unit, counted quickly. 8 legs, each one marked with, holy cow, each leg has 64 marks. The math was simple and terrible. 8 legs times 64 marks each equaled 512. 512 confirmed kills, recorded permanently on the body of the person who had made them. My God, Commander Vale whispered. You're really her. You're really Spider. The silence that followed was complete and profound. 30 elite special operations personnel stood frozen, trying to process the fact that they were in the presence of someone who had become legend within their community. Someone who was supposed to be dead. Ember, Scarlet, Spider, reached slowly for the collar of her shirt and pulled it down slightly, revealing the full spider tattoo in all its dark glory. The artwork was incredibly detailed, photorealistic in its execution. The spider's body sat directly over her heart, while the 8 legs spread across her chest and shoulders like a reminder of every life she'd taken. "My name," she said quietly, "is Scarlett Morrison. My call sign was Spider. I was the primary sniper for a classified special operations unit that officially never existed. And according to military records, I died 5 years ago during Operation Phantom Ridge." She paused, looking each of them in the eye. "But as you can see, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." The tactical training certification displayed on the wall represented thousands of hours of specialized instruction, the kind of professional development that transformed good soldiers into elite operators. Advanced marksmanship programs, designed by military professionals who understood that civilian shooting sports bore no resemblance to combat accuracy requirements. These courses covered ballistics, environmental factors, stress shooting, and psychological conditioning under extreme pressure. Veterans transitioning to civilian careers found that such certifications opened doors in law enforcement, private security, and specialized contracting roles. The training methodology was proven. 94% of graduates achieved marksman ratings that exceeded their previous military qualifications. Investment in elite-level tactical education wasn't just career advancement. It was the difference between being qualified and being irreplaceable. The revelation of Spider's true identity sent shockwaves through the assembled SEALs that would ripple for years to come. But in the immediate moment, the questions multiplied exponentially. If Scarlett Morrison was alive when she was supposed to be dead, what had really happened at Phantom Ridge? Who had authorized her death certificate? And why was she now operating under a civilian cover identity? Staff Sergeant Rains found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Spider, I called you a kindergarten teacher. I said you were dead weight." Scarlett's expression softened slightly. "Sergeant, you reacted to what you saw. In your position, with the information you had, your response was reasonable." One of the things you learn in deep operations is that assumptions based on appearance can be tactically useful, but 512 kills, Lieutenant Brooks said, his voice filled with awe. "That's more than some entire units achieve in full deployment cycles." "Numbers are just numbers," Scarlett replied. "Each one represents a decision made under specific circumstances. Some were easier than others. None of them were taken lightly." Commander Vale stepped forward, his face grave with the implications of what they'd discovered. "Scarlett, Spider, I need to understand what we're dealing with here. If you're supposed to be dead, if Phantom Ridge was classified at levels I'm not cleared for, then your presence here raises questions I'm not equipped to handle." Scarlett nodded slowly. "Commander, I understand your concern, but I want you to know that my current assignment is legitimate. I'm not here under false pretenses or for any purpose that threatens operational security." "Then why the cover identity? Why not just say your former special operations?" For the first time since her identity had been revealed, Scarlett's composure showed real cracks. Her hand moved unconsciously to the spider tattoo, tracing one of the legs with her fingertip. "Because Spider died at Phantom Ridge, Commander. What happened there? It wasn't something that anyone was supposed to survive. When I made it out, certain people decided that it would be easier if Scarlett Morrison remained officially dead." The implications of that statement hit the assembled group like a physical blow. They were talking about a cover-up at the highest levels, decisions made by people with the authority to erase someone from existence. "Who made that decision?" Master Chief Stone asked quietly. "People whose names you wouldn't recognize, Chief. People who make the kind of decisions that keep operations like Phantom Ridge from appearing in congressional hearings." Casey Walsh found her voice, asking the question that everyone was thinking. "What happened at Phantom Ridge? Why did 12 operators go in and 0 come out?" Scarlett was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant with memories that were clearly painful. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of survivors' guilt and classified secrets. Phantom Ridge was supposed to be a surgical strike against a high-value target in a region that doesn't officially exist. Intelligence indicated a single compound with minimal security. Quick in, Quick out, minimal collateral damage. She paused, her breathing becoming more controlled, more deliberate. Intelligence was wrong. What we found was a trap. Someone had leaked our mission parameters, our insertion route, our extraction timeline. When we arrived, instead of a lightly defended compound, we found a prepared kill zone with enemy forces that had been waiting for days. The silence stretched as the SEALs absorbed the implications. Leaked mission parameters meant someone with access to the highest levels of classified information had betrayed the operation. 12 operators went in, Scarlett continued. 11 died in the first hour. I spent 3 days in that hellscape, moving from position to position, picking off enemy forces while calling for extraction that never came. 3 days, Rains whispered. Alone, surrounded by hostiles. I had my rifle, limited ammunition, and no communications with command. The enemy knew someone was still alive. They could see the effects of my shooting. But they couldn't locate me, so they waited. Lieutenant Brooks asked the obvious question. How did you get out? Scarlett's smile was cold and without humor. I didn't get out, Lieutenant. I went through. When extraction finally arrived, they found a compound filled with enemy dead and one very tired sniper who had run out of ammunition. The assembled SEALs stared at her with expressions of awe and horror. The kind of sustained combat she was describing went beyond heroic into the realm of the superhuman. How many? Master Chief Stone asked quietly. Enemy casualties from Phantom Ridge. 87 confirmed kills over 3 days. It brought my total to 512. She touched the spider tattoo again, indicating one particular leg that was marked differently from the others. This leg represents the 87 from Phantom Ridge. I had it modified after I got back to acknowledge the cost of that operation. This salute cascade moment gives me chills. If you also feel satisfied seeing the truth finally recognized, like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, do you think Ember should return to active duty or continue as a ghost instructor? Commander Vale had been processing the information with growing alarm. A 12-person special operations team wiped out in a leaked mission. Survivor presumed dead, but actually alive, operating under false identity. The operational security implications were staggering. Scarlett, I have to ask, who authorized your new identity? Who's running your current assignment? That's above your clearance level, Commander. What I can tell you is that my presence here is authorized by people who have the authority to make such decisions. It was a non-answer that confirmed Vale's worst fears. They were dealing with classification levels that reached into the black budget realm, operations that didn't appear on any official organization chart. But before Vale could press further, the sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention. 3 black SUVs with government plates were pulling up to the range, their arrival coordinated with military precision. Expecting visitors, Commander? Scarlett asked quietly, but her voice carried new tension. No, Vale replied grimly. I wasn't. The SUVs disgorged a dozen people in dark suits, their bearing and coordination marking them as federal agents rather than military personnel. At their head was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. Commander Vale, the woman called out as she approached. I'm Agent Sarah Cross, Defense Intelligence Agency. I believe you have someone here who belongs to us. Agent Cross's gaze found Scarlett immediately, and the recognition between them was instant and charged with tension. Spider, Cross said simply. You've been busy. Agent Cross, Scarlett replied, her voice carefully neutral. I wasn't expecting a visit. No, I imagine you weren't. When Scarlett Morrison's name started appearing in military database queries, it triggered some very high-level alerts. People who thought they'd never hear that name again suddenly found themselves answering uncomfortable questions. Cross gestured toward the SUVs, where additional agents were setting up what looked like a mobile command center. We need to talk, Spider. About Phantom Ridge, about your current assignment, and about some recent developments that require your immediate attention. The assembled SEALs found themselves caught in the middle of what was clearly a much larger situation than any of them had anticipated. Their civilian contractor, was not only a legendary special operations veteran, but apparently still involved in activities that attracted the attention of federal intelligence agencies. "Agent Cross," Commander Vale interjected, "I need to understand what's happening here. If Miss Morrison is involved in ongoing operations, I need to know how that affects my personnel and my base." Cross studied Vale with calculating eyes. "Commander, you and your people have stumbled into a situation that involves national security at the highest levels. What I can tell you is that Spider's presence here today was not coincidental." She turned to address the assembled SEALs directly. "Gentlemen and lady, you've just witnessed a demonstration of capabilities that represent decades of specialized training and operational experience. Miss Morrison, Spider, is one of fewer than a dozen people in the world who possess her particular skill set." Cross paused, letting that sink in. "She's also needed for an operation that could not be discussed until her identity was confirmed and her capabilities verified by independent witnesses." "What kind of operation?" Master Chief Stone asked. "The kind that requires someone who can put 5 rounds through the same hole at 500 yards while under combat stress. The kind that needs an operator who can survive alone in hostile territory for extended periods. The kind that demands someone with 512 confirmed kills and the psychological strength to carry that burden." Cross gestured toward a tablet that one of her agents had brought over. The screen showed satellite imagery of what looked like a compound in a desert environment, surrounded by hostile terrain and marked with tactical overlays. 12 hours ago, a facility holding 14 American hostages was located in a region where conventional military intervention would trigger international incidents. The hostages include 2 senators, 3 defense contractors, and 7 aid workers. Intelligence indicates they will be executed in 48 hours unless ransom demands are met. The tactical situation was clear to everyone present. A hostage rescue in hostile territory, with political constraints that prevented conventional military response, requiring the kind of precision shooting that could eliminate threats without endangering civilians. "You need a sniper," Lieutenant Brooks said. "We need the sniper," Cross corrected. "We need someone who can make impossible shots under impossible conditions. We need Spider." Scarlett had been listening to the exchange with growing understanding. The marksmanship demonstration, the identity verification, the presence of federal agents, it had all been carefully orchestrated to reach this moment. "Agent Cross," she said quietly, "when you say I'm needed, are you asking or telling?" Cross met her gaze directly. "I'm asking, Spider. Despite what happened at Phantom Ridge, despite the way certain people handled your survival, you still have choices. But I want you to understand what's at stake." She gestured toward the satellite imagery again. 14 Americans are going to die in 2 days unless someone can reach them. Conventional assault would result in their execution before our people could breach the compound. Air support would level the facility with the hostages inside. The only viable option is a precision strike that eliminates the guards while leaving the hostages unharmed. "How many hostiles?" Scarlett asked, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone analyzing a tactical problem. "Satellite count shows 23 guards, positioned at multiple levels throughout the compound. Maximum engagement range would be 800 to 1,000 yards, depending on position selection. Environmental factors include desert heat, unpredictable wind patterns, and limited ammunition resupply." Cross paused, meeting Scarlett's eyes directly. "In other words, exactly the kind of mission that Spider was designed for." The assembled SEALs watched this exchange with fascination and growing respect. They were witnessing the recruitment of a legendary operator for a mission that would test the absolute limits of human capability. "Timeline?" Scarlett asked. "Insertion in 18 hours. Mission execution in 36 hours. Extraction contingent on mission success. Support? Limited. You'd be working with a 4-person team. Spotter, communications, medical, and extraction coordinator. All volunteers from units you've worked with before." Scarlett was quiet for a long moment, her fingers unconsciously tracing the Spider tattoo as she calculated odds, assessed risks, and weighed the cost of returning to a world she'd thought she'd left behind. "Agent Cross," she said finally, "if I do this, if I go back to being Spider one more time, I want something in return. Name it. Full disclosure about Phantom Ridge, who leaked our mission parameters, who made the decision to declare me dead, and why the people responsible are still in positions where they can make those kinds of decisions." Cross nodded slowly. "Agreed. Complete the mission, and you'll have access to files that will answer all of those questions. And the people responsible will face appropriate consequences." It was a promise of justice that had been 5 years in the making. Scarlet looked around at the assembled SEALs, these elite warriors who had witnessed her revelation and accepted the truth of who she really was. "Sergeant Rains," she said, addressing the man who had called her a kindergarten teacher just hours earlier. "You asked what I could teach you that you didn't already know." "Yes, ma'am. I can teach you that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody expects. I can teach you that judgment based on appearance can be tactically fatal. And I can teach you that when everything goes wrong, when your team is gone and your ammunition is limited and your extraction is compromised, sometimes the only choice is to go through instead of going around." She turned to address the group as a whole. "Today you learned that I'm someone you thought was dead. Tomorrow, 14 Americans will learn whether I'm still someone who can keep people alive." Scarlet reached into her rifle case and removed a small object, a coin-like medallion with the image of a black spider on one side and tally marks on the other. She handed it to Sergeant Rains. "Something to remember today, Sergeant. And something to remember that the quiet ones are often the ones carrying the heaviest burdens." As Agent Cross and her team began their preparations for departure, Scarlet took a moment to speak privately with Commander Vale. "Commander, I want you to know that everything that happened here today was genuine. The skills demonstration, the identity revelation, the mission briefing, all of it was real. Your people handled the situation with professionalism and integrity." "Spider," Vale said, using her call sign with obvious respect, "I want you to know that what you did here today, showing these young operators that their assumptions could be wrong, that's valuable training that goes beyond marksmanship. They're good people, Commander. Take care of them. Bring those hostages home, Spider. Show the world that legends are sometimes real." As the black SUVs prepared to depart, Scarlet took one last look at the range where she'd revealed herself to be someone the world thought was dead. The targets she'd destroyed with impossible precision still stood as testament to capabilities that few people possessed. In 18 hours, she would be infiltrating hostile territory to attempt a rescue mission that would test every skill she'd developed over years of the most dangerous operations imaginable. In 36 hours, 14 Americans would either be free or dead, and the world would know whether Spider was still the operator of legend or simply a ghost haunting her own reputation. But for now, in this moment, she was simply a woman who had finally stopped hiding from who she really was. The spider tattoo over her heart carried the weight of 512 lives taken. But tomorrow it might also carry the memory of 14 lives saved. "Time to go, Spider," Agent Cross called from the lead SUV. Scarlett Morrison, call sign Spider, formerly deceased operator of classified special operations units, picked up her rifle case and walked toward a future that promised either redemption or tragedy. Behind her, 30 Navy SEALs watched her go, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary, the resurrection of a legend and the birth of a mission that would define the true meaning of impossible odds. The California sun beat down on the Coronado Range as the SUVs disappeared into the distance, carrying with them a ghost who had decided to walk among the living one more time. And in the silence that followed, the only sound was the wind moving through the target frames, whispering secrets that would never appear in any official report. The question now was not whether Spider could make the impossible shots that the mission required. The question was whether she could carry the weight of being a legend long enough to bring 14 Americans home alive. The black SUVs rolled through the California desert as the sun climbed toward its merciless noon position. Inside the lead vehicle, Scarlett Morrison, Spider, sat in focused silence while Agent Sarah Cross briefed her on intelligence updates that had arrived during their 2-hour drive from Coronado. "Target compound is located here," Cross said, pointing to satellite imagery on her tablet. 37 miles southwest of the Syrian border, in territory that officially doesn't exist on any map. The hostages are being held in this central structure, with guards positioned at these observation points. Spider studied the tactical display with professional interest. The compound was designed like a fortress, with overlapping fields of fire and limited approach routes. Whoever had chosen this location understood military tactics. Insertion point? She asked. Ridgeline here, approximately 1,200 yards from the primary target building. You'll have elevation advantage but extremely limited cover once you begin engagement. Extraction? Helicopter pickup from the same ridge, but only after hostage confirmation. If this goes wrong, you'll be on your own for potentially hours before we can reach you. Spider nodded grimly. It was the kind of mission profile that had defined her career. Impossible odds, minimal support, maximum consequences for failure. The kind of operation that most people would consider suicide. Timeline confirmation? She asked. Insertion at 0200 hours local time. Hostages are scheduled for execution at dawn, approximately 0600 hours. That gives you 4 hours to neutralize 23 guards and secure 14 civilians. Cross paused, meeting Spider's eyes directly. Scarlet, I want you to understand something. The people holding these hostages aren't random terrorists. They're professionals, possibly former military, with equipment and training that rivals our own special operations units. Leaked intelligence again? Spider asked quietly. We're investigating that possibility. But for now, assume that they know we're coming and plan accordingly. The implication sent a chill through the vehicle. If this was another Phantom Ridge scenario, if someone with access to classified information was feeding intelligence to hostile forces, then Spider was walking into a trap designed specifically for her. 2 hours later, the convoy reached a forward operating base hidden in a rocky canyon that appeared on no official maps. The facility was minimal. A few hardened bunkers, communications equipment, and landing zones for helicopters that didn't officially exist. Spider's support team was already assembled and waiting. She recognized them immediately. Operators she'd worked with during her official career. People who understood the kind of precision required for impossible missions. Spider! Called out Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb, her former spotter from 3 different deployments. Been wondering when you'd come back from the dead. Marcus, she replied with genuine warmth. Still think you can keep up with my shooting pace? Only one way to find out. The reunion was brief but meaningful. These were people who had shared the most dangerous moments of her career, who understood the weight she carried and the choices she'd made. Having them as support meant the difference between a mission and a suicide run. Agent Cross gathered the team around a tactical display table where detailed intelligence materials were spread like a battle plan. Final briefing in 30 minutes. Equipment check in 60. Insertion in 6 hours. Spider spent the remaining daylight hours in focused preparation. She checked and rechecked her rifle, making microscopic adjustments to scope settings and testing ammunition consistency. Each round was hand-selected, each measurement verified to tolerances that would be meaningless to anyone except a precision shooter operating at extreme ranges. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, Spider found herself thinking about the Navy SEALs she'd left at Coronado. By now, they would be processing everything they'd witnessed, trying to reconcile the quiet instructor with the legendary operator. The story would spread through the special operations community, creating ripples that would eventually reach the highest levels of command. But that was a problem for another day. Tonight, 14 Americans were counting on skills they didn't even know existed, trusting their lives to someone whose name appeared on death certificates in classified files. The helicopter insertion went perfectly, as these things rarely did. Spider and her support team were on the ground and moving toward their objective within minutes of touchdown. Their equipment distributed and communications tested. The desert night was crisp and clear, perfect conditions for precision shooting. Spider settled into her hide position on the ridgeline at exactly 0200 hours, her rifle barrel extended through carefully arranged camouflage that would render her invisible to anyone more than 50 yards away. Through her scope, the compound appeared as a collection of heat signatures and moving shadows, guards patrolling in patterns that suggested professional training. "Spider, this is Overwatch." Marcus's voice came through her earpiece. "I count 23 hostiles, 14 civilians in the central structure. Guards are armed with assault rifles and positioned for overlapping coverage." "Copy, Overwatch. Beginning target assessment." What Spider saw through her scope confirmed her worst fears. The guard positions weren't random. They were specifically designed to make a precision shooting approach nearly impossible. Whoever had planned this operation knew exactly how special operations rescue missions worked and had prepared accordingly. "Overwatch, I'm seeing professional positioning and equipment. These aren't random terrorists." "Confirm, Spider. Target discipline and movement patterns suggest military training." Spider spent the next hour studying the compound, identifying guard rotations, communication procedures, and potential vulnerabilities. What she found was deeply troubling. The entire setup appeared designed to lure a rescue attempt into a carefully prepared kill zone. At 0400 hours, 2 hours before the scheduled execution, Spider made her decision. "Overwatch, beginning engagement. Execute on my mark." "Copy, Spider. Standing by." The first shot broke the desert silence like a crack of thunder. One guard dropped instantly, eliminated with surgical precision before he could raise an alarm. Spider's rifle cycled smoothly, chambering the next round as she acquired her second target. Shot 2, 3, 4. Each one delivered with mechanical precision, each guard eliminated before awareness could spread to the others. Spider moved through her target list with the methodical efficiency that had made her legendary. Her breathing controlled, her movements smooth as flowing water. By 0430, 12 guards had been eliminated without a single alarm being raised. The compound appeared peaceful, but Spider knew the remaining hostiles would be the most dangerous, the ones positioned to respond to exactly this kind of attack. "Spider, be advised, movement in the central structure. Hostiles are moving toward the civilian holding area." The timeline had just accelerated. If the remaining guards reached the hostages, the mission would become a bloodbath that no amount of precision shooting could prevent. The Spider shifted position, moving to a secondary hide that provided a different angle on the compound. Through her scope, she could see guards rushing toward the central building, assault rifles ready, their movements suggesting they were preparing to execute the hostages rather than allow rescue. Shot 13 came at a range of 1,400 yards, beyond the theoretical limits of her rifle system. The bullet took nearly 2 seconds to reach its target, requiring calculations that accounted for wind drift, bullet drop, and the movement of both shooter and target. The guard dropped just as he reached the entrance to the hostage building. 14, 15, 16. Spider was moving through the remaining targets with desperate speed, knowing that each second of delay increased the risk to the civilians. Her rifle had become an extension of her body. Each shot delivered with the kind of precision that defied human capability. At 0445, with 7 guards remaining and dawn beginning to lighten the eastern horizon, Spider faced the impossible shot that would define the entire mission. The last guard cluster was positioned around the hostage building, in a formation that made simultaneous elimination necessary. If any one of them had time to enter the structure, 14 Americans would die. "Overwatch, I need target coordinates for simultaneous engagement." "Spider, that's 7 targets in overlapping positions. Maximum time window is 30 seconds before they breach the building." "Copy. Execute in 3, 2, bark." What followed defied every principle of physics and human capability that military training manuals considered possible. 7 shots in 30 seconds, each one delivered at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, each one accounting for different environmental factors and target movements. 7 guards dropped in rapid succession, their elimination so precisely timed that the last one fell just as the first one's body hit the ground. The compound fell silent, its defensive perimeter completely neutralized by a single shooter, operating at ranges that most people would consider impossible. "Compound secure," Spider reported, her voice steady despite the superhuman feat she'd just accomplished. Moving to hostage extraction. The rescue itself was almost anticlimactic compared to the shooting exhibition that had preceded it. 14 Americans, senators, defense contractors, aid workers, emerged from their prison into a desert dawn that they'd never expected to see. Their rescue had been accomplished by someone whose existence was officially denied, using skills that pushed human capability beyond recognized limits. But as the extraction helicopter approached and the rescued hostages were loaded aboard, Spider found herself thinking not about the mission's success, but about the implications of what she'd discovered. The compound's professional setup, the guards' military training, the tactical positioning that suggested inside knowledge of rescue procedures, all of it pointed to the same conclusion that had haunted her since Phantom Ridge. Someone with access to the highest levels of classified information was feeding intelligence to hostile forces. Someone in a position of trust and authority was betraying American operations for reasons that Spider couldn't yet understand. And until she found out who and why, no mission would ever be truly secure. The helicopter ride back to the forward operating base gave Spider time to process the night's events. 23 confirmed eliminations, 14 civilians rescued, 0 friendly casualties. By any metric, the mission had been a complete success. But success felt hollow when it was built on a foundation of betrayal and cover-ups that reached to the highest levels of command. Agent Cross was waiting at the landing zone, her expression mixing relief with something that looked like apprehension. Outstanding work, Spider. Preliminary reports indicate all hostiles eliminated, all civilians recovered safely. Agent Cross, Spider said as she disembarked, we need to talk. About Phantom Ridge, about tonight's mission, and about whoever's been feeding intelligence to our enemies. Cross nodded grimly. I was hoping you wouldn't notice the similarities. The compound setup was identical to Phantom Ridge. Professional positioning, inside knowledge of our tactics, guards who knew exactly how to counter a precision shooting approach. Someone told them we were coming. That's what we're afraid of. Cross led Spider to a secure communications bunker, where classified materials were spread across multiple workstations. The setup looked like the kind of investigation that had been ongoing for months, possibly years. Scarlet, what I'm about to show you is classified at levels that most government officials aren't cleared for, but you've earned the right to know the truth about what happened to your team and why you've been officially dead for 5 years. The first document Cross handed her was a classified after-action report from Phantom Ridge, stamped with clearance levels that Spider had never seen before. The official version of events bore no resemblance to what she'd actually experienced. According to the report, the Phantom Ridge operation had been a complete success. 12 operators had eliminated all hostile forces, secured the target objective, and extracted without casualties. There was no mention of betrayed intelligence, no reference to a 3-day siege, no acknowledgement that 11 operators had died in a carefully prepared trap. This is fiction, Spider said quietly. None of this happened. Keep reading. The second document was even more disturbing. A classified memo authorizing the creation of false death certificates for all Phantom Ridge personnel. The reasoning given was operational security and preservation of classified methods. In bureaucratic language, it meant that the truth about Phantom Ridge was so damaging that it was easier to declare everyone dead than to investigate what had really happened. Who signed this authorization? Spider asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. General Brooks Hartwell, Pentagon Special Operations Command, the same officer who's currently overseeing counterterrorism operations in 7 different theaters. The name hit Spider like a physical blow. Hartwell had been her commanding officer during the early stages of her career, the man who had recommended her for special operations training, who had personally selected her for the unit that eventually became her identity. The idea that he had betrayed his own people was almost impossible to process. Why? She asked. That's what we've been trying to figure out for 5 years, but tonight's mission may have given us the answer. Cross pulled up surveillance footage from the hostage rescue operation, satellite imagery that showed the compound from multiple angles during Spider's attack. But the cameras weren't focused on the building or the eliminated guards. They were tracking something else entirely. Look at this, Cross said, highlighting a section of the footage. At 0452, approximately 7 minutes after compound security was neutralized, We detected a brief communication burst from inside the target building. The hostages had communications? No, this signal came from a different source. Someone who was observing the entire operation and reporting to an outside contact. The implications were staggering. Someone had been inside the compound during the rescue, watching Spider's every move, documenting her capabilities and methods. The hostage scenario hadn't just been a rescue mission, it had been a live-fire assessment of Spider's abilities, conducted under conditions that would reveal the absolute limits of her skills. "I was being tested," Spider said quietly. "We believe so. The question is why, and by whom?" Cross activated a secure communication link that connected them to analysts at the Defense Intelligence Agency's most classified facility. Within minutes, voice pattern analysis had identified the source of the communication burst from inside the compound. The voice belonged to Colonel Marcus Webb, Pentagon Special Operations Command, Spider's former spotter who had been part of tonight's support team. The revelation hit Spider like a physical blow. Marcus had been with her on a dozen missions, had spotted targets for her most difficult shots, had been one of the few people she trusted absolutely. The idea that he had been feeding information to hostile forces was almost impossible to accept. "Marcus has been compromised?" she asked. "Worse than that," Cross replied grimly. "We believe he's been working for General Hartwell since before Phantom Ridge. The betrayal of your unit wasn't random intelligence leaks. It was a deliberate test of your capabilities under extreme stress. They murdered 11 operators to test me? That's what the evidence suggests. Hartwell wanted to know if the rumors about Spider were true, if one person could actually survive the kind of impossible odds that had become your reputation. Phantom Ridge was designed as the ultimate test." Spider felt something cold and deadly settling in her chest, a rage that had been building for 5 years finally finding its target. The deaths of her teammates, the years of hiding, the carefully constructed cover identity, all of it had been orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to protect American interests. And tonight? Tonight was Phase 2. Hartwell needed updated assessment of your capabilities. Verification that 5 years hadn't diminished your skills. The hostage rescue was real, but it was also intelligence gathering. Cross pulled up additional files, documents that painted a picture of corruption and betrayal that reached to the highest levels of military command. General Hartwell hadn't been working alone. He was part of a network of senior officers who had been selling classified information to foreign governments for years. "How many others know?" Spider asked. "That's what we're trying to determine. But based on tonight's mission results, we believe Hartwell is planning something that requires someone with your specific skill set." "What kind of operation?" Cross hesitated, clearly weighing the security implications of what she was about to reveal. 3 days from now, there's a classified summit meeting between American defense officials and allied government representatives. The meeting location is known only to a handful of people with the highest security clearances. And General Hartwell is the senior military representative at that summit. If he's been compromised, if he's working for hostile foreign governments, then that meeting represents an opportunity to eliminate key American leadership in a single operation. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Hartwell had been gathering intelligence on Spider's capabilities, not just for assessment purposes, but because he needed someone with her skills for a specific mission, someone who could eliminate multiple high-value targets at extreme range under impossible conditions. "He wants me to assassinate American officials," Spider said quietly. "That's our assessment. The question is how we stop him without alerting the rest of his network." Spider was quiet for long minutes, processing information that redefined everything she thought she knew about her career and the people she'd served with. The betrayal went deeper than she'd imagined, involving not just isolated incidents but a systematic corruption that had infected the highest levels of command. "Agent Cross," she said finally, "I want to propose something that's going to sound insane. I'm listening. We don't stop Hartwell. We let him recruit me for whatever operation he's planning, but instead of stopping it from the outside, we control it from within." Cross studied Spider's face, recognizing the calculating expression of someone who had spent years operating in the deepest black operations. You want to go undercover into his organization. I want to do more than that. I want to identify everyone in his network, document their activities, and gather evidence that will stand up in court. Then I want to feed them false information that will neutralize their ability to threaten American interests. That's incredibly dangerous. If they suspect you're working against them, then I'll be exactly where I've always been, alone, surrounded by hostiles, with limited ammunition and no support. Spider's smile was cold and predatory. Except this time, I'll know who my real enemies are. The plan that emerged over the next several hours was complex, dangerous, and required precise timing that left no room for error. Spider would allow herself to be recruited by Hartwell's organization, but she would be feeding information back to Agent Cross through encrypted channels that bypassed normal military communications. The key was making her recruitment appear natural, as if Hartwell had successfully manipulated her into joining his cause rather than the reverse. That meant Spider would have to convincingly portray someone whose loyalty had been shattered by years of betrayal and abandonment. 3 days later, Spider received an encrypted message through civilian channels requesting a meeting at a location that wasn't on any official map. The message was unsigned, but the encryption signature identified it as coming from General Hartwell's office. The meeting location was a private airfield in Nevada, where corporate jets could land without customs or security scrutiny. Spider arrived at the specified time, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying the rifle case that had become her signature accessory. General Hartwell was waiting for her, his appearance unchanged from their last meeting 5 years earlier. Tall, distinguished, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority, he looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a senior military officer serving American interests. "Scarlett," he said warmly, as if greeting an old friend rather than someone he'd betrayed and left for dead. "You look well. I hear you've been keeping busy." "General," Spider replied carefully, "I wasn't sure you knew I was alive. My dear, I've been tracking your activities since you disappeared from that hospital in Germany. Did you really think someone with your skills could stay hidden indefinitely?" The casual admission confirmed Spider's worst suspicions. Hartwell had known she was alive all along, had been monitoring her activities, possibly even orchestrating events to bring her to this moment. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want to offer you something that the United States government never could. The truth about what really happened to your team, and an opportunity to make the people responsible pay for their betrayal." Hartwell gestured toward a private jet waiting on the tarmac, its engines already running. "There are people I'd like you to meet, Scarlett. People who understand that patriotism sometimes requires working outside official channels." Spider studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What she saw was even more dangerous. Genuine conviction, the absolute certainty of someone who believed his cause was righteous. "And if I refuse? Then you'll go back to hiding, pretending to be someone you're not, while the people who murdered your teammates continue making decisions that cost American lives. Is that really how you want Spider's story to end?" It was a masterful manipulation, appealing to both her desire for justice and her sense of duty. Hartwell understood exactly which psychological pressure points would be most effective, how to make betrayal seem like patriotism, and treason appear to be loyalty. "What kind of operation are we talking about?" Spider asked. "The kind that requires someone with 512 confirmed kills and the psychological strength to make impossible decisions. The kind that demands precision shooting under conditions that would break most people." Hartwell handed her a briefing folder marked with classification levels that officially didn't exist. Inside were satellite photographs of a conference facility in Switzerland, architectural plans that showed sight lines and security positions, and target profiles for a dozen individuals whose faces Spider recognized from classified briefings. "Government officials?" she asked. "Traitors," Hartwell corrected. "People who have been selling American secrets to foreign governments for years. People whose actions have cost thousands of American lives and compromised operations across 7 different theaters." The targets included senators, defense contractors, intelligence officials, and military officers. a cross-section of people with access to the most sensitive classified information. According to Hartwell's briefing materials, each of them had been identified as part of a network that was systematically betraying American interests. "How did you identify them?" Spider asked. "Years of investigation, surveillance, and intelligence gathering. We've documented their activities, traced their communications, followed their financial transactions. The evidence is overwhelming." Spider studied the briefing materials with growing unease. The intelligence was incredibly detailed, far beyond what any normal investigation could have produced. The level of surveillance and penetration suggested resources that went far beyond what a rogue general could access. "Who's backing this operation?" she asked. "Patriots, Scarlett. People who understand that sometimes the system is too corrupt to reform from within. People who believe that decisive action is necessary to preserve American security." "That's not an answer." Hartwell's expression hardened slightly. "Some questions are better left unasked. What matters is that we have the resources, intelligence, and authority to eliminate threats that the official government is unwilling to address." It was confirmation that Hartwell wasn't working alone, that his organization had support from sources he wasn't willing to identify. The implications suggested foreign government involvement, possibly hostile intelligence services that were using American assets to eliminate inconvenient obstacles. "Timeline?" Spider asked. 48 hours. The targets will be gathered at this facility for a classified summit meeting. Security will be minimal because the location and participant list are known only to people with the highest clearances. Extraction? You'll be provided with documentation and transportation that will allow you to disappear permanently. New identity, financial resources, complete separation from any past associations. Spider nodded slowly, as if considering the offer seriously. "General, I have one question that's going to determine my answer." "What's that?" "Why didn't you extract me from Phantom Ridge? You had the resources, the intelligence, the authority. But you left me there for 3 days, surrounded by hostiles, with no support and limited ammunition. Why?" Hartwell's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Because I needed to know if Spider was real or just a legend. I needed verification that you could survive impossible odds and still complete the mission. You murdered 11 operators to test me. I sacrificed 11 people to identify someone with the capabilities necessary to preserve American security. It was a tactical decision based on operational requirements. The casual admission of mass murder, delivered with bureaucratic calm, confirmed everything that Spider needed to know about Hartwell's character and motivations. He wasn't a patriot making difficult choices. He was a sociopath using American assets to serve foreign interests. "I need 24 hours to consider your offer," Spider said. "Of course. But understand that this opportunity won't be available indefinitely. The operation requires someone with your specific skills, and there are very few people in the world who possess them." As Spider left the airfield, she was already composing the encrypted message she would send to Agent Cross. Hartwell's organization was larger and more dangerous than they'd suspected, with resources that suggested state-level support and objectives that went far beyond simple corruption. The next 24 hours would be critical. Spider needed to convince Hartwell that she was willing to participate in his operation, while simultaneously providing intelligence that would allow Cross to identify and neutralize the entire network. It was the kind of delicate manipulation that required perfect timing and absolute precision. But as she drove away from the airfield, Spider found herself thinking about the Navy SEALs she'd left at Coronado just days earlier. 30 elite operators who had witnessed her resurrection from official death, who had seen proof that legends could be real, and that quiet competence could triumph over loud arrogance. Tomorrow, she would either eliminate a network of traitors that threatened American security, or she would join the list of operators who had been sacrificed to preserve secrets that should never have existed. Either way, the world would learn whether Spider was still the operator of legend, or simply a ghost haunting her own reputation. As night fell over the Nevada desert, Spider began her final preparations for a mission that would test not just her shooting skills, but her ability to walk among enemies while serving the cause she'd sworn to protect. The question wasn't whether she could make the impossible shots that the mission required. The question was whether she could carry the weight of being a legend long enough to bring justice to those who had betrayed everything she'd fought to defend. 24 hours later, Spider stood on a mountaintop in Switzerland, her rifle trained on a conference facility where 12 individuals were about to learn the true meaning of precision justice. But the targets in her scope weren't the government officials that Hartwell had identified as traitors. They were Hartwell himself and 11 associates who had spent years selling American secrets to hostile foreign governments. Agent Cross's investigation had revealed the truth. The traitors Hartwell wanted eliminated were actually intelligence officers who had discovered his network and were preparing to expose it. The real traitors were the ones who had recruited Spider for this mission. Through her scope, Spider watched as Hartwell entered the conference room, confident in his belief that he had successfully manipulated one of America's most deadly operators into eliminating his enemies. He had no idea that every aspect of his operation had been compromised, that his network had been identified and documented, that evidence of his activities was already being presented to congressional oversight committees. Spider's finger found the trigger as Hartwell took his seat at the conference table. 5 years of betrayal, 11 murdered teammates, countless American lives lost to leaked intelligence. All of it was about to be answered with the kind of precision that had made her legendary. "Overwatch, this is Spider," she whispered into her communications device. "Beginning engagement." "Copy, Spider. Justice is served." The shot that followed would be recorded in classified files as the most significant single action in American counterintelligence history. Not because of its technical difficulty or precision, but because it eliminated a threat that had been operating at the highest levels of command for years. General Brooks Hartwell never knew what hit him. One moment he was confident in his success, the next he was gone, eliminated by the very weapon he thought he had turned against American interests. As Spider packed her rifle and prepared for extraction, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the Navy SEAL range at Coronado, where she'd revealed her true identity, through the hostage rescue that had tested her skills, to this final confrontation with the people who had betrayed everything she'd fought to protect. The legend of Spider would continue, but now it would be based on truth rather than rumor, on justice rather than revenge. 14 Americans were alive because of impossible shots made under impossible conditions. 11 murdered operators had finally received justice, and a network of traitors had been eliminated before they could cause further damage. As the extraction helicopter approached, Spider found herself thinking about the Navy SEALs who had asked what she could teach them that they didn't already know. Now she had the complete answer. She could teach them that sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought not against foreign enemies, but against betrayal from within. She could teach them that legends are real, but they're built on sacrifice and precision, rather than glory and recognition. And she could teach them that the quiet ones, the ones who carry their burdens in silence, are often the ones who preserve everything that matters. The helicopter lifted off from the Swiss mountainside, carrying with it a ghost who had finally finished haunting her past. Scarlett Morrison, callsign Spider, was officially alive again, her record cleared, her service recognized, her legend confirmed. But more importantly, she was free. Free from the shadows, free from the lies, free from the weight of carrying secrets that had nearly destroyed her. The spider tattoo over her heart would always carry the memory of 512 lives taken, but now it also carried the promise of justice served and truth revealed. As the helicopter banked toward home, Spider allowed herself a rare smile. The question hadn't been whether she could make the impossible shots that justice required. The question had been whether she could carry the weight of being a legend long enough to ensure that legends meant something worth believing in. And the answer, written in precision and paid for in blood, was yes. The story would never appear in official reports or congressional hearings, but in the quiet corners of the special operations community, wherever elite warriors gathered to share stories that couldn't be told in polite company, they would speak of the day when Spider returned from the dead to teach the world that some legends are too important to stay buried. And sometimes, the most important lesson isn't about shooting. It's about knowing when to shoot, who to trust, and how to carry the weight of impossible choices with quiet grace. The helicopter disappeared into the distance, carrying with it the final chapter of a story that had begun with mockery and ended with justice. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the mountain wind whispering secrets that would never appear in any official record. But the truth would live on, carried by those who understood that sometimes the greatest victories are won not with loud proclamations, but with quiet competence, not with arrogant display, but with precise action, not with the need to be seen, but with the willingness to remain invisible until the moment when visibility serves a greater purpose. Spider was home. 6 months later, at a small cafe in downtown San Diego, a blonde woman in civilian clothes sat reading a newspaper over morning coffee. The headline spoke of mysterious resignations in Pentagon leadership, a classified investigation that had quietly eliminated threats to national security. Most readers would never understand the true story behind the bureaucratic language, but Scarlett Morrison understood perfectly. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Cross. New situation developing. Interested in consultation work? Scarlett smiled, finishing her coffee. The spider tattoo remained hidden beneath her shirt, but its meaning had evolved. No longer just a record of lives taken, it had become a symbol of justice preserved. She typed back, always ready to teach. Some legends never truly retire.